Number 8. Goliath. You already know the tale. Two armies facing each other across a valley. A Philistine warrior standing nearly 10 feet tall, wearing armor so heavy almost no one could lift it. He walks forward alone. Nobody dares to face him. Until a teenage shepherd loads a stone into a sling and brings him down with a single strike. It's one of the most repeated stories in human history, and also one of the most doubted. For centuries, historians treated Goliath as a literary device, an invented giant meant to magnify the hero's triumph. The Philistines left behind records, lists of rulers, trade agreements. They were a documented civilization, and in none of their papyri did anyone matching that description ever appear. Archaeologists weren't saying the battle was fiction, they were saying the giant almost certainly never existed. Until 2005, at Tel Safi in southern Israel, when a team pulled from the ground a pottery fragment the size of a palm, carved into its surface, two names in ancient Philistine script, both tracing back to the same root as Goliath. And this is what makes it extraordinary. Tel Safi is, with archaeological certainty, the city of Gath, Goliath's hometown according to the biblical account. The fragment dated to the 10th century, early 9th century BC, the same century as the narrative. Nobody's claiming that fragment belonged to Goliath himself. What it did accomplish was knock down the central argument of the skeptics and prove that the name existed in that exact city, in that exact century. Gath turned out to be one of the largest Philistine cities ever excavated, and its skeletons were noticeably taller than those of neighboring populations. 3,000 years of doubt, closed by a piece of pottery the size of a hand. Number 7. The Amazons. For 2,000 years, they were the punchline, an entire society of warriors who lived without men and fought with a ferocity that made Greek armies nervous. They appear in the myths of Hercules, Achilles, Theseus, and academics treated them as myth, as male anxiety dressed up in armor. Because the alternative, actual armies of female warriors, sounded biologically and culturally impossible. Then archaeologists started opening burial mounds in the Eurasian steppe, Scythian territory. At first, the burials followed the expected pattern, men with weapons, women with jewelry, until tombs appeared with weapons and armor alongside female skeletons. Initially, they assumed misidentification, until DNA analysis arrived. Tomb after tomb, site after site, they confirmed the same thing. Skeletons buried with swords, spears, and battle axes were women. The bones showed the same stress marks as male warriors and healed battle wounds. Today, it's estimated that between 20 and 30% of Scythian women were active combatants, not ceremonial, warriors by training and by funeral rite. The Greeks weren't writing fantasy. They were describing, with the amazement of someone who can't quite believe it, something real they had witnessed on the frontier. Number 6. Boudica. A queen burned 3 of the most important cities Rome had outside Italy and nearly defeated the greatest empire of the ancient world. For centuries, official history treated her almost as invention. Boudica, of the Iceni people in England, in the year 60 AD, after her husband died and divided his kingdom between his daughters and Rome, the Romans ignored the arrangement. They seized the lands, flogged her publicly, and assaulted her daughters. She unified rival British tribes, gathered a massive army, and razed Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium one after another. The Roman governor withdrew his legions before facing her in open battle. According to Rome's own accounts, she killed between 70 and 80,000 people. But for centuries, there was suspicion that Tacitus and Cassius Dio had inflated everything into myth, until archaeologists started excavating beneath London. What they found was a layer of ash, half a meter below modern streets, over ancient Londinium, a dense stratum of ash and charred wood dated around the year 60. Today, they call it the Boudican Destruction Horizon, and it appears under Colchester and St. Albans as well. 3 cities, same date, same catastrophic signature. This evidence doesn't need to debate a Roman historian's bias. It's physical, it can be dated, and it matches across all three sites at the same time. The Romans said she raised everything. The ground proves them right. Number 5. Pontius Pilate. He asked one of the most famous questions in history. What is truth? Seconds before signing one of the most defining executions of the ancient world, Pontius Pilate, Roman prefect of Judea. He appears in all four Gospels, in Flavius Josephus and in Tacitus. For 2,000 years, serious academics doubted he had actually existed. He didn't appear in any physical archaeological record, and the sources that mentioned him had theological interest or were written later. And then, in 1961, summer at Caesarea Maritima, Italian archaeologists excavating an ancient theater pulled from the rubble a block of limestone, reused as building material. The text, in Latin on its face, remained legible, 4 lines with a name and a title. Pontius Pilatus, Prefectus Judaeae. The so-called Pilate stone is now in the Israel Museum. It's not a religious object, it's a routine Roman administrative inscription, and that makes it more valuable. It was written by Roman bureaucracy recording who was in charge, not a Christian with an agenda. The inscription confirmed that Pilate existed and that his title was exact, prefect, closing an old academic discussion about his rank. A bureaucratic stone of 4 lines closed 2,000 years of doubt. Number 4. Lady Fu Hao. While almost no woman in the ancient world had political voice or military authority, one woman in China commanded actual armies. She returned victorious again and again and held one of the highest religious offices of her era. The year was 1200 BC. Her name was Fu Hao, and almost nobody believed she was real. She appeared on oracle bones, the oldest Chinese writing, with her name linked to military campaigns and state consultations alongside King Wu Ding. Historians found it difficult to believe in so much independent power, and many treated them as ritual exaggeration. Until 1976, when a construction crew in Anyang, China, struck something underground. Fu Hao's tomb appeared intact, never looted, exactly where the inscriptions suggested. In more than a century of archaeology in Anyang, no other royal tomb had remained unlooted. Inside were more than 1,600 objects, 130 bronze weapons, including axes reserved for military commanders, hundreds of jade objects, and 6 human sacrifices, according to the customs of the highest rank. And the weapons weren't decoration to honor a widow. They were a commander's arsenal, buried with the commander. The remains confirmed a woman between 35 and 45 years old, exactly who the oracle bones said. Number 3. Odysseus, a cyclops, a sorceress who turns men into pigs, the song of the sirens. 10 years trying to get home after a war. The Odyssey is one of the most told stories in humanity, and for centuries most historians classified it firmly as fiction. The skepticism had basis. Homer was writing centuries after the events, and the geography dissolved into poetic contradiction when trying to map it. Most conclusively, Ithaca had never yielded evidence of a Mycenaean palace. If the king had existed, he'd left nothing in the earth. Until archaeologists examined more closely a site on the northern peninsula of Ithaca, Agios Athanasios, and they found the foundations of an enormous, multi-level Mycenaean palace complex dated between 1300 and 1200 BC, exactly the window of the Bronze Age collapse and the Trojan War. The design, with its central hall and cyclopean walls, matched in detail the Homeric description, and the location has panoramic views of 3 different seas, exactly as the text specifies. No inscription with the exact name Odysseus ever appeared. But the excavation proved that Homer's Ithaca wasn't fantasy. There existed a real and wealthy Mycenaean kingdom on that island, with kings ruling from a sophisticated palace, at the exact moment the poem places them. Number 2. Romulus. Twin brothers abandoned, raised by a she-wolf. One kills the other over the boundaries of a city, crowns himself king, and vanishes in a storm, carried away by the gods. So the legend tells of the birth of Rome, founded in 753 BC by that man, Romulus. For generations of historians, this was folklore invented to give an empire a divine lineage. Until 1899, archaeologists excavating beneath the Comitium, the political heart of ancient Rome, found an underground sanctuary so ancient that even the Romans had forgotten its origin. At the center, a U-shaped altar of volcanic tuff beside a broken column. Ancient writers had documented such a monument, marking the place where Romulus was buried or torn apart. But what shook historians was a pillar with an inscription in Boustrophedon style, the oldest Latin ever discovered from the 6th century BC, declaring cursed anyone who desecrates the space and explicitly mentioning Rex, king. This stone alone collapsed the consensus. It proved that 6th century Rome wasn't primitive huts, but an organized and literate society governed by actual kings. Decades later, a few steps away, a sarcophagus from that period appeared, empty, no remains, something that fits disturbingly with the legend of a body that disappeared. There's no way to prove whether the man who killed his twin rested there, but the Romans didn't invent the story out of thin air. They built their capital around a very real monument dedicated to a founding king. Number 1. King Arthur. We all know the Hollywood version. Shining armor, round table, a castle called Camelot, a wizard. But ask a serious historian about the real Arthur, and they'll tell you he's a ghost. The Arthur of literature was invented, largely by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, stitching together Welsh folklore with invention and placing his conception in Tintagel Castle in Cornwall. For centuries, historians dismissed it. When Geoffrey wrote, Tintagel was an empty rock. Then modern archaeology arrived at those cliffs and began to dig. Beneath later medieval ruins, a high-status fortress appeared, dated to the 5th and 6th centuries, exactly the window in which a historical Arthur would have lived, uniting the Britons against the Anglo-Saxons. And the ground yielded more luxury Mediterranean pottery than the rest of the British Isles combined. Spanish glass, Turkish tableware, amphorae from Byzantium. This was not a primitive outpost. It was the seat of a wealthy and lettered elite. And in 1998 came the final blow. A slate fragment reused as a drain cover with an inscription. Artonio, descendant of Cole, made this. Artonio derives from the British root arto, bear, the same root that gives rise to the name Arthur. This doesn't confirm the King of the Round Table or Merlin the Wizard. It confirms something equally extraordinary, that in the 6th century, in the exact fortress where legend places his birth, there lived a powerful leader with a variant of that name. The 12th century stories didn't come from nowhere. They were built upon a real fortress, ruled by true warriors.